Adeptian MBE.
Thank you, Catherine, for that introduction, not least for not including that bloke from the wheelchair dancing thing that used to be on the BBC, usually just before EastEnders. You know, the one that got replaced by the swimming hippopotamuses. But guys, don't knock it, because it got me where I am today, which is here at the National NHS Leadership Recognition Awards. Right, let's get into the spirit. If you bear with me, I'm just going to tell you a few stories of some of my experiences with the NHS. So having contracted polio, moved to this country when I was 3, it'll come as no surprise to any of you when I tell you that the NHS has been a really big and important part of my life. Honestly, if there was a loyalty card, I'd have earned enough points to go private by now. Now, anyway, I spent a large proportion of my school years going in and out of Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital for operations and checkups, but mainly to attend appointments in the appliances sections, by which I don't mean an obscure part of the hospital where they treated sick fridges and washing machines. Rather, that was where they built the calipers I wore until the age of 16. Now, Mr. Towers was my technician, an irony that was not lost on me or, I imagine, any of his patients, none of whom were ever likely to tower over anybody. The calipers started off as unwieldy iron rods, which went up and down each side of my left leg, attached tightly with leather straps. Honestly, if I looked like that today, I'd definitely have been a contender for the lead part in 50 Shades of Grey. You know what it's like when you're a kid. You want to look cool, and while I know there have been some weird fashion trends in recent years, not even Kate Moss could have made my calipers look cool, although I'd love to see her try. In fact, coupled with my mum's flamboyant clothing choices, for me, I was the total opposite from cool. Now, picture the scene. Back then, in the early days of caliper technology, they didn't even bend at the knee. Oh yeah, no genuflecting for me. So when I walked, I looked like C-3PO from Star Wars with chewing gum stuck on the bottom of his foot. Used the force, I couldn't use any bloody force. The only time I found calipers useful, apart from when I was walking, of course, was when I put the occasional leg-breaking tackle in football matches. Oh yeah, they didn't call them crunching tackles for nothing. I can still hear the bones crunching now. Anyway, the point is, I was properly uncool. I mean, very uncool. But it seemed as if salvation was around the corner, because in the late 80s, there was a trainer revolution. Remember that trainer revolution? Well, there was a trainer revolution in my school. You know, kids would turn up in Reebok pumps, Adidas Gazelles, Nike Cortez, BK Knights, even LA bloody gear. You know, the ones that lit up. Yeah, those ones, yeah, they were seen as super cool. Now, I mean, remember, it was the 80s, so people used to wear some seriously dodgy stuff. But I used to beg my mum to buy me trainers, and I would have worn anything, Gola, Dunlop, even Pony, and they were really Pony. But she wasn't having it. She'd always say that they weren't strong enough for my calipers. Well, I wasn't taking "I'm your mother and I know what's best for you because I've been looking after you for 14 years" for an answer. So one day, when I was about that age, we were on one of our regular visits to Great Ormond Street Hospital for a boot fitting when I decided enough was enough. I bypassed my mum, don't know how I bypassed her, but I managed to start speaking to Mr. Towers directly, and I asked him if he could adapt a pair of trainers so they would work with my calipers. I'm sure he could see the desperation in my eyes, but I also reckon he was up for the challenge. So when he said yes, I was ecstatic. If I'd been able to, I would have got down on bended knees and kissed his feet. You know what I mean? I remember thinking, yes, this is it. My days of looking like an idiot are over. For some strange reason, I pictured myself swaggering into school, John Travolta style, with the Bee Gees Staying Alive playing in the background. Something, ironically, that if I had done, I probably wouldn't have, I would have found it really difficult to stay alive, you know, going to school, listening to that music. But anyway, in my head, I reckoned it would look like me walking to school in a pair of Trevor Brookin's latest football boots with studs on. You know, I had like a proper active imagination, and they were way better than the hospital boots that I used to wear. Now, even Mr. Towers, even though Mr. Towers had agreed to it, it still like took a lot of arguing to get my mum on side. But eventually, I wore her down, and she bought me a pair of Adidas Oxfords. Now, as I'm sure you'll all know, that they were a mid-trainer boot worn by rowers. They certainly weren't as cool as Reebok Classics or Nike Cortez, but they were way better than the monstrosities that I was used to wearing, which, as I think I've made clear, were about as cool and trendy as Boris Johnson's hair is now. Now, still in their box, I gave the Oxfords to Mr. Towers, who took the left boot out because that's all he needed. We exchanged looks, though thankfully not phone numbers. Our relationship never was like that. And we both nodded in acknowledgement at the important task that lay ahead. It was like I was King Arthur, he was Merlin, and my left boot was Excalibur. Now, when the time was right, and after he'd worked his magic on them, I would be ready to use this magic. I would wear that boot, and girls would kiss the boot. Boys would marvel at the boot as I skipped past them effortlessly on the football pitch, twinkle toes-like with my skill. It would be the age of the boot, and I would be the coolest kid in the school. Oh yeah, I certainly knew how to keep my expectations in check. But 6 agonizing weeks passed until eventually a huge parcel addressed to me, to my house, was delivered. Now, I was about as excited as a 14-year-old boy could be without needing Kleenex. I could see the parcel was from the hospital, and I tore into it. Christmas morning had nothing on this. I don't think I'd ever opened anything so quickly, with so much excitement, expectation, so much anticipation, so much desperation, all of which crumbled within moments as I first laid my eyes on my treasured boot. You see, I have to be honest with you guys, my left leg is quite a bit shorter than my right. So to balance things out, Mr. Towers, Mr. Bloody Towers, had put a 6-inch wedge on the bottom of my beautiful Adidas Oxfords. They looked terrible. And the worst thing was, the first time I wore them to school, my classmates renamed them Reblocks. They didn't need to give me a wedgie, I already had one. If only Mr. Towers had been called Mr. Leaning Towers. Thank you, NHS. Now, listen, I've got just one more story. Of course, now I can look back and tell you funny stories about my calipers, but back then, they were really the bane of my life. And eventually, though, along with my virginity, I lost them and started using a wheelchair, which in turn led me to become a wheelchair basketball player, which is how 20 years ago I ended up playing basketball in a tournament in Cyprus and discovering how lucky we are to have the NHS in this country. Now, I played for a team, believe it or not, called the Hackney Sparrows. Yeah, it's a dodgy name. We complained about it all the time, though to no avail. I mean, other basketball teams have names like the Houston Rockets, Chicago Bulls, Atlanta Hawks, names that make their opponents tremble in fear. Sparrows only make the opponents tremble with laughter. Frankly, we felt more like great tits. But what's in the name? Clearly nothing, because we made it to the final of this tournament, and it was a fantastic achievement. But the afternoon before the final, I woke up in my hotel room in agony. I was in serious pain around my lower back. It felt like I'd swallowed a piece of broken glass, which was scratching away at my insides. I mean, even now, I still wince at the thought of it. My roommate informed our coach, who contacted the hotel manager, and before I knew it, a local doctor was standing over me. Now, he was a big guy with a booming voice, and he asked me where the pain was. When I told him it was in my lower back, he shook his head and he tutted to himself, and I guess they're not big on bedside manner in Cypriot medical schools. But having told him where the pain was, he managed to locate the exact bit of me that really hurt, and he did the obvious thing, and he touched me there, which didn't make me tut, it just made me let out this blood-curdling scream, because it was proper agony. He then did the next obvious thing, and he took my coach and my roommate over to one side of the room to negotiate his fee. And to be honest, he was in quite a strong bargaining position, because I would have sold my grandmother to make that pain stop. You know, I couldn't really work out what was going on, but eventually I saw a cheque being handed over and a broad smile appear on the doctor's face. It's funny how money will do that to people, isn't it? Having got his wedge, though not in the same way that I got mine all those years before, he came over and he told me I had two choices. I could go to the hospital, where I'd have to stay for a couple of days, or he could give me some tablets and an injection, and the pain would ease off in a few hours. Now, with a final to play that evening, I was desperate to be on the team, so I went for the injection and the tablets, which were duly administered by Dr. Tut, a distant relative of King Tut, I believe. Now, to this day, I've no idea what I took or if any of it was legal, but true to his word, a few hours later, the pain was pretty much gone. And that evening, I played one of the best games of my life. I was properly on fire. I scored 30 points. You know, I felt like I was floating across the court. You know, unfortunately, we lost the match, which might have been a blessing in disguise, because we'd probably have been stripped of the title if we'd won, because there's no way I would have passed the drugs test. A few weeks later, back in the UK, the pain came back, and I was seen by a very nice, non-tutting, and most importantly, non-cash demanding NHS doctor. Now, it turned out that I had kidney stones. You know, I was treated immediately. They used a laser, I think it was, to break up the stones, and a few days later, I was fine. In any other country, that treatment would have cost me a fortune, or at the very least, a massive row with some insurance company or other would have probably ensued, meaning that the pain would have gone on for much longer. So I was and am continuously grateful to the NHS. And as we come together this evening to celebrate leadership within the organisation, I think it's worth pointing out that as well as having many great leaders within the NHS itself is a great leader. It's a shining example to the whole world of medical care at its very best, and something this country should be ridiculously proud of. Oh yes, you guys can give yourselves a round of applause.